Yeah, so my approach with cold calling is one that's actually quite repetitive. Most people in the office are probably sick of hearing my same intro every time. But I like to keep it consistent just because then you know if it's not working, you can change it. If you change too many things at once, right, you don't know what is and isn't working. So I keep that the same, which is a permission-based opener, which I'm sure people have read about on LinkedIn. From yeah, so that's pretty much me saying, this is a cold call. Do you want to hang up now? Give me 30 seconds, right? And I think where I initially heard that is from a man called Benjamin Dennehy on LinkedIn, who's the UK's most hated sales trainer. He's fantastic, by the way. Any SDR watching this should go and have a look. But it's just a typical sort of Sandler selling style opener, right? And then I move on to my intro or my hook, where I whatever the ICP I'm speaking to, I'll say typically I speak to Elric if you're an SDR manager, and they tell me they're frustrated because, for Cognism anyway, the example would be they're not having enough conversations with the right decision makers. And then I'll move on to 3 problems. And the importance for me of listing these problems is it's a very quick sort of qualification piece. Either they've got one of those problems and we can have a conversation around it, or alternatively, they're telling me they don't have one of those problems and I need to discuss that, explore that a little bit further. So, I mean, if it's helpful, I can give the examples that I would use on a cold call.
Can you do? Well, let's do like I'm an SDR leader. I'm your prospect runner. So what
Yeah,
what will be
I like that.
the three pain points for an SDR leader?
Yeah, so Elric, I would say, typically I speak to SDR leaders and they tell me perhaps they're frustrated. The team have got the tech, they got everything they need. They're just not speaking to as many decision makers as they could be. And they normally, Elric, give me one of 3 reasons for that. Either they don't know who to speak to in the companies they're reaching out to. Number 2 is maybe they know exactly who they want to speak to. They just can't get the cell phones, the emails for those people. Or sometimes number 3 is they've got all that information, they've got a piece of tech that's trying to solve that, it's just not giving them the results that they were hoping for. And then I finish it off with what I think has become a little bit of my signature, which is, I've got a funny feeling, Elric, you're going to tell me now that not a word there really applies in your world. And it's a little bit, when I started out, it felt a little bit cheeky, but it's a little bit different to just the typical, does any of that resonate with you? That's a very simple question. And actually you're using a bit of Chris Ross's negotiation techniques where you're almost daring them to say no. So in actuality, what happens is you actually get a lot more yeses from that. So that's the reason I started using that to end that sequence.
Before talking about the hook, you are saying that, for example, if you don't have, for example, the prospect doesn't have like any of those pain points, you said that you're going to dig a little bit more. So what do
Yep.
you start asking?
Yeah, so Elric, if you turned around and said to me, "No, listen, none of that really applies. We're all good. We're all fine," which happens quite a lot. I would say, no, that's fine. I'm glad, number 1, that it's going as perfectly as it sounds. But my question off the back of that, Elric, would be: is that because your team aren't cold calling, they're not cold emailing, they're not using those, or is it something else? That's what I would ask, to then dig into, what's going on. What is their processes there? What is their current systems? Or is this just a brush off objection, which is my job as an SDR to try and get past? So that's the question I'd ask, Elric.
Yeah, because I imagine sometimes that people that are not listening, but then when you are asking this question, that's when you realize that maybe they are just not listening to you. So
Yeah.
let's say, for example, let's say, we use even though I said no, I don't have any pain points, but then I say, my team is making, I don't know, 50 cold calls per day, for example. What do you say next?
Well, I say, obviously they're using the phone to generate new business. Are you telling me that that's going perfectly, Elric? They can speak to who they want, when they want, and there's no issues surrounding that. Am I understanding that correctly? And the reason I asked that, I mean, I'm guessing most sales leaders are probably then going to say, well, no, it's not perfect. It's never perfect. That's something I hear quite often, which for an SDR is like the golden egg, where you've just got a little bit of a foot in the door now to say, well, listen, if it's not perfect, what's going wrong with it? Is it that they're not speaking to the right people, or they're just not speaking to, they're not having a high enough connect rate? And it just really, these questions, Elric, just allow you to start a conversation, which is your ultimate goal with a cold call.
Yeah. And do you talk about benchmark for an average of the connect rates, for example, on the call with your prospects. For example, because if I say, yeah, no, I think we are good, do you talk about a specific number? Because I was mentioning earlier, for example, we have 5 or 6% average on connect rate. So that's, if we compare to your average connect rates, that's pretty low. So do you talk about that?
It's less about it's my approach anyway, is less about trying to force numbers down their throat and more about trying to understand their situation and then positioning Cognism as a solution. So I've got to find a pain, right? In order for me to use my approach, I have to find a pain. So to answer your question, I wouldn't probably say, oh, your connect rate's 5%, well, Cognism's is 10%. I would probably say something along the lines of, listen, it sounds like from what you're telling me, you're pretty happy with a connect rate of 5% right now. I'm an SDR at Cognism. We have a connect rate of maybe 10%. If your team, is it fair to say that if your team were getting double the amount of connects, they might just book double the amount of meetings? And then it's about getting them to notice that perhaps there is a bit of an opportunity there. Getting them to see the value of the product and really getting them to buy in, and then we're kicking again. We're firing on all cylinders, and we can start the conversation. We can carry it on.
So let's say now, let's say I have a pain. When do you stop the call? Do you try to dig a little bit on the pain, and then when you find, I don't know what you're looking for here, but what do you do?
So when I started out cold calling, and certainly when I joined Cognism, my cold calls were a lot shorter. They were like 5 minutes. And once I got to a point where I realized they had a pain, I would very quickly ask the question, hey, listen, if Cognism could solve that pain, is there any reason you wouldn't want to discuss this with me? Bang, book a meeting. But obviously moving up into enterprise, I've realized that doesn't always work too well when it comes to pipeline generation, right? It becomes a lot more about qualification. And finding their pains, challenges and goals. So I've had to adapt that approach a little bit. So the first half stays the same, and then the second half you asked about, once I found the pain, what am I doing? So now I'm going to ask them more questions about their current processes. I'm going to ask them what regions are they currently targeting, what industries are they currently targeting, and then I'm going to position Cognism as a solution to specifically those regions, those industries, those decision makers, and that's how I'm going to close it. So I guess to answer your question, once I've found a pain, I'm going to carry on to do another 1 to 2 minutes of discovery with that prospect before I come to the close. And that's just to make sure that my pipeline generation is as good as it can be. Still leaves a little bit to be desired if you ask my manager, so I'm still something I'm working on. It can always be better.
Now, how do you end the call, actually? So now you find the pain, and then you ask more questions around this pain. So how do you end the call?
Yeah, so in the dream scenario, if you've done things by the book here, you've found a pain, you've probably quantified that pain, so they understand that it's causing them a problem and that they're losing out. And then the last step is just to position Cognism as a solution to that problem. Now, it's not enough, I've found, certainly in enterprise, just to say, hey, listen, Cognism can solve that. Do you want to have a chat? It's more about, especially if you're speaking to VPs, to directors, they want to know exactly how you can do it. So is this half an hour a good use of their time? So what I would say is, Elric, if we've had a discussion and I found out that you're targeting CTOs in Europe, and actually your connect rate is 5%, but you think it could be higher and you're missing out on opportunities, I'm going to bundle that all into one final paragraph, which is pretty much, well, paragraph's the wrong word, one final sort of statement, which is saying, Elric, Cognism can solve that by providing you contact data for X, Y, Z, and we can solve that issue, and hopefully the goal being to increase your connect rate and increase your pipeline generated. If we could do that, is there any reason you wouldn't meet with us to discuss this further? And if you've done the cold call well, then the answer is probably yes. So that's how I go in for the close.